looking forward to hearing what they have to say this morning. So with that, we're ready to go as soon as they're ready to kick off.
Point your browser to lcatalytics.com. And a cell phone will work as well. lcatalytics.com. And then you have to create a student code called demo. Yes. And in Texas, in Austin, can you guys raise your hand if you hear me? In Austin? No, you're not in Austin. These guys are in Austin. Okay, thanks guys. Okay. You're not in Austin. Okay. Yes, and so the people in Austin should be getting your browser. You can fully participate in Austin if you point your browser to lcatalytics.com. We should send you guys a note. You know what? I'll send you a note. Oh, they can. Oh, thank you. Robert.
No, we can see
I didn't even realize you can see that screen. So, okay, you guys do it too. And then join session 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And all that information is on the screens, left and right. And then as people sit next to you, would you just ask them to point their browser and join? That would be very, very helpful. We'll save time this way. I want to give all the time to Dr. Missouri. Oh, sorry. Out of your way. Good.
Good morning. I'd like to go ahead and begin our session this morning. Good morning. I am Al Hamrick, and Superintendent Sherman Bennett School District, and our incoming president of Texas ASCD. On behalf of the Texas ASCD Board of Directors and our Executive Director, I would like to welcome you this morning to the second day of the conference. I'd also like to thank you for your part in making the first day a great success. I hope that as we move through the session today, that you will continue to be challenged with the many great sessions that have been planned for you. This conference has been planned so that we may work together to expand our knowledge and our passion for integrating technology at our schools, in our districts, throughout our communities. As we move to today's session, I hope that you have a great day and that each session that you attend will exceed your expectations. In just a moment, Mr. Allen and members will come to the podium and give you some more information. Thank you.
I just want to acknowledge the Texas ASCD folks have just done an amazing job as a partner in this conference. And I just want to thank you, Al, and tomorrow I'll thank you, Londa. But just a big hand for Texas ASCD for having the vision to pull us off together. Thank you very much. All good. So this morning we have a partner group in Austin, Texas, at the University of Texas Conference Center. It's an organization of chief technology officers. Their national organization is COSIN, and they have their meetings today. And we found out that we would have this overlapping meeting time, and so it just made sense in our conversations to have Dr. Mazur's keynote be broadcast right into Austin. So there's another 200 folks in Austin, and they represent more than 1 million Texas students, quite the group. So welcome to Austin. I hope you guys are totally plugged in. It looks like you are. And so I just want to say welcome to Austin. And now, ordinarily I would ask you to turn to your left and turn to your right, but I want to knock down another water. Dr. Mazur has had more influence over my thinking than anyone in the last 2 years. He's completely hurt my brain about the kinds of information and the kinds of decisions and engagement with students that teachers can make. The real added, what is the real added value of a teacher? And the first time, and this will be for many of you the first time, it can be a little overwhelming. So enjoy the moment. And the good news is there's YouTube videos of Dr. Mazur, and I think many of you will need to process this morning, if you're like me, for quite a while, to fully realize the complete impact. So welcome if it's the first time you've heard Dr. Mazur. But I've had the opportunity to sit in his classroom at Harvard and watch the magic, and it is magic. What he's able to do about engaging people in critical thinking and learning to question their own learning, which is what experts actually are known to be able to do, one of the most important skills. And so Dr. Mazur flew in last night from Denmark to be here. It's getting quite late. I'm amazed he's up this early in the morning. So if you don't mind, help me welcome Dr. Eric Mazur, Dean of Applied Physics from Harvard.
Good morning. Let's try that again. You're just waking up, I guess. Good morning, Texas. Good morning. And good morning, Austin. It's a pleasure to have the people from the CTO Clinic here as well. No, I don't want to say this. Let me get back to my presentation because we put these instructions up at the last minute. Okay, so is everybody ready to help liberate the world from the tyranny of the lecture? Good. I'm here to give a lecture about that. Okay, well, you saw the instructions already. I hope you got online. We have about 250 people connected. The more, the better. If you happen to not have brought your device, not a big deal, because you can probably peek over the shoulder of your neighbor. And I will also project some screens. Okay, if you're on Twitter, but don't tweet during my talk because I want you to pay attention. No, just kidding. My handle is @Eric_Mazur, and the hashtag for my lecture is LecTyr, the first 3 letters of lecture, the first 3 letters of tyranny. Okay, so this talk, we started off with technology or getting you logged on, but the talk really is about education. And, I've been involved in education as an instructor for close to 30 years, as a student for much longer than that. But if you ask me to define the word education, I struggle with that. I know what is meant by the word education, but if I had to actually write down in a few words what that word exactly means, it's not that easy. I don't know exactly what it's meant. Think about it. Ask yourself, how would you define in about 10 words what the meaning is of the word education? Well, you can't really start any talk on education without first understanding exactly what it means. Yet we're having many talks about it without defining it. So I want to do a little reflective exercises. That's what I would really like to start with. So while you're still logging in, I'll keep these instructions at the bottom. So for those of you who are just walking in, point your browser to alcatalytics.com, create a student account with the sign-up code DEMO, D-E-M-O, all lowercase, and then join the session 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But if you've done that, pull out a little piece of paper or a blank page on your computer or whatever, something that you can commit something to, and I would like you to write down on a little piece of paper something you are good at, something you are proud of, something you know other people respect you for. It could be public communication, it could be doing algebra, it could be interpreting works of art, it could be baking cakes, it could be, you name it. Ideally, I want that something to be something that has played an important role in your career. Okay? And you're all successful individuals, so it shouldn't take that hard to come up with something. Commit to it. Fold over the little piece of paper so that nobody can see what you wrote down. This is very personal information. I will not ask you to reveal it to anyone, but I do want you to commit to it. I sometimes have people ask me only one thing, but yes, just pick one. If you're so successful, there are many things that are coming to mind, just pick one. Okay, anybody need more time? No? Okay. So now comes the hard question. And this question, I want you actually to input into the system. So if you're on your iPhone, you will see the second question, which is asking you to think how you became good at it. In just a few words, I want you to write down the words that describe how you became good at it. Of course, you could say, I learned it, but that's cheating, right? I mean, I want you to describe what the circumstances were that led to you developing that skill or ability or knowledge or whatever it is. Now, that's a hard question because, we often don't realize how we learn the things that we do well, because the things that we do well are the things that we really like. In Elliot's words, if you have not read his latest book, I absolutely urge you to do. I saw an early copy of it, I picked it up, I could not put it down. I was gripped by this introductory story, but you own the learning if it's something you really, really like. Okay, so I have here about 69 responses. I need a few more, so please enter in your device how you became good at it. We have about 300 people connected now. That's good, that's great. I've done this, by the way, all over the world. 10 days ago, I did it in Africa. I've done it all over Latin America, I've done it in Asia, I've done it in Europe. I did it 2 days ago in Denmark, actually. I've done it all over the US, and you know what? There are no cultural differences. Now, I know, I'm in Texas today, but I don't expect any differences here either. And in fact, on my screen here, I do see that Texas is no different from anywhere else. I'm going to stop input here. I know not everybody has had a chance to answer yet, but look on your screen of your device and share it with your neighbor, if your neighbor doesn't have a device. And you'll see a word cloud, and that word cloud shows one big word. What is it? Practice, exactly. I'm not, by the way, some of you are looking at the screen here. I'm not displaying the results on the screen because the results are displayed on your devices. So practice. You need to practice in order to become good at something. Now that's not the main reason I did it. I did it because if you look carefully through that word cloud, you see that there are some very familiar words that are missing. What are those? School, university, lectures, they're all absent. In fact, in only a few cases I've had one or two people write down lecture. And how do we teach? That's how we teach. In fact, this is a picture of me teaching, and this is an old picture, by the way. This is BC, before computers. See, I'm still using an overhead projector. But basically, this is me teaching as an assistant professor my introductory physics class for pre-medical students. These are students who do not want to learn physics. They're not there because they want to learn physics, I should say. They're there because they're told to take the physics course in order to be able to apply to medical school. It's kind of ironic, right? We all just admitted that the things that are important in our life, the things that we're good at, we do not learn in the traditional setting in which we teach. So right off the bat, we see here a problem. Anyway, so this is how I'm going to structure my talk today, and the outline will stay at the bottom so you know where we are. I first like to talk a little bit about the lecture, so that we understand this process a little bit more. I'll come back to it at the very end of my talk because I recently uncovered some data that will absolutely surprise you. I mean, they really blew me away. Then I'll talk about peer instruction, which is what I did in my classroom starting about 22 years ago in order to address some huge shortcomings of my lectures. And lastly, I'll talk about a new incarnation of peer instruction, which I'll call peer instruction 2.0, which involves the website in which you're logged in, learning catalytics, and we'll have some fun with the system. So that's the exciting stuff, which I'm keeping at the end just to keep you in suspense. So then in 3 slides, I'm going to give you the history of the lecture. It all starts back with the invention of the Greek amphitheater 2,000 years ago. This architecture that we use in many of our learning spaces. Actually, I recently came across an illustration from 2500 BC, where the C does not mean computers this time, so 4,500 years ago, of a palace school in Syria, where you can see benches arranged in rows, all facing forward, with the sole purpose of focusing the attention of many onto one. Now, the Greek were smart enough not to use that as a learning space. They used it as a performance space. In fact, if you've ever looked at an illustration of the School of Athens, you don't see people arranged like that. And Socrates, over 2,000 years ago, already said we shouldn't teach by telling, but we should teach by questioning. Anyway, never mind. People kept using this architecture. Fast forward, 18th century, and another 200 years, and you're in the lecture hall that I teach. And in fact, this room, this very room here, is not that different. So that leads to the question, what is it really that is happening in the lecture? If we look at this picture here of me teaching, I would like you to describe to me the activity that is taking place on the screen there behind me. And I want you to use a verb. The 2 verbs I do not want to hear are teaching and learning. So go ahead. Blurt it out. Loudly. Watching. Listening. What? Did somebody say sleeping? My students are not sleeping. Look, they all have their heads right straight. You know, actually, sleeping it's an interesting thing. I'll get back to sleeping at the end of my presentation here. I recently came across a quote from a French author by the name of Albert Camus, who said, "Some people talk in their sleep. Lecturers talk while other people are sleeping." No, my students are not sleeping. So we heard a couple of verbs, but they all had to do with the audience, the students, not with me. I'm there too, right there in front. So let's try to hear some more. Go ahead. Talking, explaining, showing off. Yeah, in a sense that's perhaps true, but now we're talking only about me. Is there a way that we can capture the whole process? Interacting. Now, how much interacting is really taking place? I mean, yeah, we're interacting. I'm working hard. I'm starting with interaction, but have you think back of your courses when you were a student? I remember the professor stopping and said, "Does anybody have a question?" Students look down, right, because they don't want to make eye contact, right? There's no real interaction. So, daydreaming? Well, maybe. I don't know what's going on in their brains. But so the whole process, how do we capture that process? Oh, come on, you're not giving me much credit for my brilliant lecture. It's misunderstanding, I hear. More. observing, we're back at the students. Delivery. Delivery of what? Information. I would say most lectures and a lot of teaching focuses on the delivery of information. And you know what? My students had rubbed that in my face, and I had ignored it. You see, when I started teaching in 1984 at Harvard, I was an assistant professor, I didn't ask myself the question, how am I going to teach? In retrospect, that's odd, right? Because the first thing you should ask yourself when you do a new job is, how am I going to do it? But to me, it was perfectly clear. I was going to do to my students what my students had done to me. Sorry, my professors had done to me. Namely, lecture. But there was another question that came up in my mind when I heard that I was going to teach physics 11, the dreaded physics for pre-med course. What do you think that question was? I think I heard it. What am I going to teach exactly, or what precisely? What book am I going to use? So I went to a colleague who had taught the course before, and I asked him that question, and he said, oh, in this course in the past we have used Halliday and Resnick. I can see some of you nod yes, because you know it's a book that has been used probably for the past 40 years, and believe it or not, it is, I don't know how many is printing, and the edition is still being used. Now I was told that in the US, I was educated in Europe, but in the US, students buy textbooks for introductory courses. In Europe, we never get this in our mind, right? I mean, why would you spend $100 some dollars to buy a textbook if the professor was going to present the contents of the book to you? But anyway, I was told I had to make sure that there were enough books at the Harvard our bookstore. So I walked to Harvard Square, I went to the bookstore and I said, make sure that you have 150 copies of Halliday and Resnick ready in a few weeks when the course starts. And as I walked back to my office, I said to myself, wait a minute, if the students have the same book as I have, then what do I do in class? My colleague's office was on the way to my own office, so I knocked on his door and I asked him this question, and he said, oh, don't worry, there are lots of different physics textbooks, and he showed me a whole shelf full of them. I looked at it, and very quickly I found the perfect book. It was perfect for two reasons. One, it had a different approach, so I wasn't just regurgitating the same material to them. But, and this was really the most important reason, the book was out of print. It was a perfect book to, secret book to prepare my lectures from. So for each class I spent hours and hours preparing lecture notes to lecture from. And in class I would either project those notes on the overhead projector or write them on the board behind me. Now because the approach was different from the approach of the book, I gave my students copies of the notes at the end of each lecture, so as they walked out, they could grab a copy on their way home. Now, why do you think I was handing them out at the end of class and not at the beginning? Yeah, so as to get them to pay attention to me. But isn't that, if you think about it pragmatically, isn't that already admitting that there's something wrong? I mean, why force them to come and listen to me and get the information out of my mouth if they could have gotten the same information out of my lecture notes? That never came up in my mind. But you know what did happen was that after a few weeks, a number of students came to me and they said, Professor Mazur, could we get a copy of your lecture notes at the beginning of each class? This way we don't have to write down that much. And I had indeed noticed that each time I wrote A on the board, 150 pens went A in the notebooks of the students. I once heard somebody describe the lecture as a process whereby the lecture notes of the instructor get transferred to the brains of the students, to the notebooks of the students without passing through the brains of either. And that was precisely what was happening in my class. So I started to hand them out at the beginning of each class. And much to my relief, the students wouldn't just walk in, grab the notes, and go back to bed. No, they grabbed the notes, sat down, and they still copied everything because they had no time to read the lecture notes. Well, the first term, I got very high evaluations for my teaching. And you know what happens when you get high evaluations? You get punished and you're asked to teach the course again. So the next year that I had to teach the same course again, I said to myself, you know what, rather than handing out these notes lecture by lecture, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, a week before the course starts, take the whole collected set of notes for the entire semester, send it out for duplication, so that on day one I can give the students everything for the entire term. You know what the unexpected result was? The unexpected result was that on my end of semester evaluations, about half a dozen students wrote, Professor Mazur is lecturing straight from his lecture notes. Hello? I mean, what was I supposed to do? Develop another set of lecture notes to lecture from that was different from the lecture notes I handed out to them? I mean, I was livid. These are grateful students. But you know what? They had a point. I was regurgitating information to them. I was focusing simply on the delivery of information. But given the fact that this is the way people teach all around the globe, we could ask ourselves the question, is that what education is? Is education merely the transfer of information? We don't have clickers here. I could set up a quick question on learning analytics, but I'm too lazy to do it. But think about it. If you had to vote on a yes-no question, we'll use fingers, okay? 1 for yes, 2 for no. And everybody raises their hand at the same time. And if you don't raise your hand, I'm going to come to you with a microphone, put it in your face, and you're going to have to tell everybody why you said it, and you're in trouble, okay? So if you think education is just the transfer of information, you put up 1 finger. If you think education is more than just the transfer of information, 2 fingers, okay? So at the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Go ahead. Look around. Got a couple of 1s there, but mostly 2s. I see you got 1 there. Oh, you don't have to be afraid. I'll take all the 2s too, don't worry. Okay, so I saw 1 and 2 1s, but an overwhelming majority for 2. What evidence do we have that it cannot be 1? What could we do? If education was just information transfer, what would be the logical thing to do? If it's 1, I see a very dark future ahead for all of us. We're out of a job within the next 20, maybe even 10 years. Why? What would be the logical thing to do? Deliver it any other way, right? I mean, you could just videotape the best lectures, the best presentations, supplement them with multimedia, whatever, you name it, and deliver it electronically. What would we lose by doing that? What would we lose by doing that? Personal interaction, but think about a lecture. How much personal interaction is there really? I'm trying very hard to get personal interaction here, but a standard lecture, there's very little to no interaction at all. So occasionally there might be some interaction, that might be lost, but there's very little because 99.9% of the students never get to interact with the instructor. What would we gain by doing it that way? We gain that way that you can listen to the lecture. First of all, you don't have to make it in blocks of 1 hour or whatever. You can make it in logical units that deal with concepts or ideas. You can chunk it down into pieces that make much more sense in the lecture than a rigid schedule of 1 hour blocks. The student can look at it whenever he or she is ready for it. If you don't understand something, you can rewind it and listen to it again. How many students have in your classes raised their hand and say, Professor, could you please repeat the last 5 minutes? I didn't understand it. I've never had that happen. You can also stop the delivery of information and think. Think. Have you ever had a student raised hand and said, Professor, could you please be quiet for 5 minutes? I need to think. Never had that happen in my class, I can tell you that. So you gain all of that, or you can stop and get on the phone and say, and call a friend and say, do you understand what Professor Mazur said at 8 minutes and 2 seconds into the presentation on rotational inertia? Can't do that in a real class. So I think you gain a lot. Okay, but the overwhelming majority of you fortunately had 2. I'll get you in the corner, because now you have to tell me what it is that is missing. If it's not just the transfer of information, what else is necessary? Questioning, collaboration, creation, feedback. But think about the exercise we just did at the beginning of my talk. What was the big word? Practice, exactly. You need to do something with that information. You need to be able to extract from the information the knowledge and the skills that you can apply in a different context. You need to assimilate, you need to construct mental models. That needs to take place in the head of the learner. The instructor does not control that. You can facilitate it, but you cannot control it. Unfortunately, I think so much of education, including my own, is simply the delivery of information by a teacher to a student. You wait 1 or 2 months, and then on an assessment, the student regurgitates information back to the instructor. I was educated in Europe. Europeans pride themselves in their education. Well, let me tell you, I'm not afraid of admitting in public that I have probably forgotten 99% of everything I've ever learned. In line with what the famous American psychologist Skinner would say, education is what is left after all that is learned is forgotten. Think about it, very deep quote, I think, so true. Take history. I have years of history. I grew up in Holland, so Dutch history was, of course, very important. I remember learning that at some point in the 17th century, in can somebody please Google it for me? I don't remember the year. 1660 something, the Dutch defeated the British in the River Thames, on their home turf, just outside London. And then on the exam, a few months later, in what year did the Dutch defeat the British? I must have been okay, because I ended up, in college, but I don't remember the date. Have I learned anything useful? Do I remember what the circumstances that led to this defeat that the British suffered? No. What were the events that led up to it? Nothing. What's the context? None. Simply this idea of the instructor delivering information, the students regurgitating it back. So I think that's unfortunately what a lot of education focuses on, but not what we actually would like to accomplish. So what's the result of that? And usually when I talk about education, I give much more detail. Especially I show data, because I think it's so important to have data. Unfortunately, I won't do data today, but if you're interested in, you can go to my talk called Confessions of a Converted Lecturer on YouTube, where I actually show the data. But basically, the essence of that presentation shows this tremendous lack of learning. In fact, my students at Harvard, a very select group of students, did barely better at the end of the semester than they did at the beginning of the semester on an assessment instrument called the Force Concept Inventory, testing their understanding of the concept of force, which is the most basic concept in physics. And in fact, some of them do barely better than a gorilla randomly pressing buttons, on the keyboard. I am not joking. I wish I was joking, but I'm not. 70% are still Aristotelian thinkers, and that percentage only drops to about 50% when I give my highly regarded lectures to them. That has changed now, but way back then. Another thing is lack of retention. Lack of retention of knowledge. Lack of retention of students. Incidentally, talking about learning, I think that the important thing that we really want to teach is we want our students to be able to apply what they've learned in a new context of their learning. In that vein, I cannot resist an anecdote that recently happened. I was giving a talk at a very well-respected university south of Boston. And I gave a talk on physics and biological education. And at the end of my talk, a professor came up to me and he said, I had something really interesting happen in class this semester. He had tried very hard to put physics in the context of the real world in order to raise the interest of the students. And in order to do that, he had taught physics in the context of baseball. There's a lot of physics in baseball, right? Trajectories of balls, collisions between bats and balls, runners running. I mean, you can put all of physics into baseball. And in class, he would use examples from baseball. On the homework, there were baseball problems. On the midterm examinations, there were baseball problems. At the end of the semester, he was putting together the final exam. And as he was writing his questions, he realized that he would run out of baseball questions. So he put some football questions on the exam. Professor, complained the students, we've never done any football problems. I'm sure you recognize some of your own students, or maybe some of your own experiences as a student. If it's not familiar, can't do it. But if you stop to think about it, that's actually a very serious symptom. It means the learner is unable to transfer whatever has been learned into a new context. And the only thing that can really then be tested is recall. Recall, which plenty of research has shown, is going to be forgotten very soon. Now, I'm sorry to start off the day with such a bleak picture, but I wouldn't do it if I couldn't propose a solution. Oh, by the way, before I play this, I'm not long ago I came across a little clip that is actually almost 14 years old, Saturday Night Live in the 70s. I want to show it to you because if information transfer is indeed the key, or is indeed everything related to education, I don't know what to do with information transfer. But if it's just information transfer, there is a very simple solution. It goes badly for you, for me, because we lose our jobs, but this is what you would do. Listen to Father Guido Sarducci. Saturday Night Live.
Education, I think it don't matter where you go, particularly America, Brazil, all of the same. It's all just memorization. And it don't matter how long you remember anything, just so you compare it back for the test. And I got this idea for a school I would like to start. Something called the 5-minute university. And the idea is that in 5 minutes, you learn what the average college graduate remembers 5 years after he or she left the school. Would it cost like $20? That might seem like a lot of money, $20 just for 5 minutes. But that's for like tuition, capping and down the rental, graduation picture, snacks, everything. Everything is included. You don't think in college you have to take a foreign language. Well, at the 5-minute university, you can have your choice. Any language you want, you can take. Say if you want to take Spanish, what I teach you is, ¿Cómo está usted? That means, how are you? And the answer is, muy bien. Means very well. And believe me, you took 2 years of college Spanish. 5 years after you're out of school, ¿Cómo está usted? Muy bien. About all they're going to remember. So in my school, that's all they learn. You see, you don't have to waste your time with the buy something and you sell it for more.
You're all laughing about it, but I think, we really should be crying because there's a deep truth in everything he says. So let's turn to what I did in my classroom when I discovered that my students were really not learning. In fact, I struggled with it for a long time because first what happened was I gave them forced continuity in the sense of my student, or he was going very poorly, and he was on a common distance. Maybe Eric, after all, you're not such a bad teacher. But that could obviously not be true, right? So I discarded that possibility very quickly. I thought about it some more, and I thought, well, maybe I have some very dumb students. But in Harvard, so it's a different statement to make. So I thought about it a bit more, and then my twisted brain came up with some perfect excuse. I'm telling you this just to show you how I struggle with this. Put yourself in my position. You're teaching this calculus-based physics course, very difficult to get the students who solve the most complicated problems on their exams, and then you give them a very simple word-based assessment, and then fail miserably. How would you explain that to yourself? Well, practice one, those are very complicated problems. I would ask them this complicated two-dimensional object, I'm not sure how to do it. They would carry out triple integrals and come up with the right answer. If I asked them to compare the forces of the collision between the truck and the car, they would forget all about every outcome. How would you do that to yourself? Did it apply? Well, that would be me, right? I knew I was a good teacher. I read the problems. I had a much simpler explanation. Just I'm telling you this just to show you how even when the naked truth stares you in their face, you're trying to deny it. The assessment was not going to happen, something wrong with the test. Right? And I didn't stop there. Maybe to my own credit, what I did, I said, I'm going to show this assessment is not good. And I decided on examinations to put two types of problems on exactly the same subject. Surveys, that was the first one I did. I had a standard textbook problem, and then I had a word-based problem that was so simple that I actually had to fight with my colleague to have them agree to put it on the exam. He thought it was so trivial that the students would be all offended by it. So we actually made that word-based problem the number one problem on the exam, the warm-up call. It turns out the students all and it became clear that the students were able to do the standard textbook problem, but they were not able to answer the much simpler word-based problem. So what's going on here? What were the students doing? They were not negotiating, they were solving problems. They were solving problems. They were simply taking a recipe description and applying it to a problem where the colors have been changed, red becomes blue, and 2 becomes 4, and so on. So little cosmetic changes. But real creativity, real innovation was completely absent. What is the real problem? Let's think about that for a moment, because I think most educators all around the world all agree. I would like my students to become better problem solvers with plenty of problems. Right? So how do you become a better problem solver? Well, let's first think about what is a problem. A problem is knowing exactly where you want to get, but not knowing how to get there. You have a product. You want to make it successful. The outcome is known. Successful product. The road to that outcome is not known. There's no certainty to making any arbitrary product successful. Or, you have a job interview in New York, You're about to board the last lane of the day to New York. The flight is canceled. You've got a problem. You need to be at the job the next day in New York. And there's one more flight. There's no prescription for getting to New York. The outcome again is known. You in New York, the way to get there is unknown. And so on. Now, what is the standard problem that we ask our students to do on most of our assessments? It's a question where the answer is unknown. Let's take one from our own field, right? A car hits a tree, there's a whole description, and the question at the end of the question, at the end of the problem, as they're called, says, what was the velocity of the car just before it hit the tree? Now the outcome is unknown. What's that velocity? But the student in his mind says, what are the prescriptions for calculating velocities? Oh, I know this trick and that trick. I'm going to apply that in order to calculate velocity. So the procedure is known, the answer is unknown. It's very different. The first type of problem that I discussed requires innovation and creativity. The second one does not. It's simply maybe one level of representation, but not much. In fact, most of our students would get upset if you ask them a problem where the procedure is unknown. Now, I've had plenty of students come to me and say, Professor Mazur, I've never done a problem like that. I tell them, look, if you had done a problem like that, it would by definition no longer be a problem. Right? So I think a lot of our assessment and a lot of our teaching avoids the most interesting parts of education. And I found that it's in part a matter of comfort, right? And in the beginning, you're very comfortable in something that involves an unknown procedure. You'd much rather deal with something that has a known procedure and an unknown answer. But it's just a matter of doing it. If you push people more, they'll become more comfortable. Also, you know, I have long discussions with how right? The standard approach to teaching, deliberative information regurgitation, solving problems that are not really authentic problems, but actually exercises. At best, they can get the students to reach our level. I want my students to stand on my shoulders, not to just come up to my level, but to be able to solve the problems that I have not yet solved. There are plenty of problems in the world, energy, environment, conflict, that this generation doesn't know how to solve. We're hoping that the next generation can solve it. Well, if we use our current approach to teaching, you know, progress will be slow. So let's think a little bit about education, right? I mean, we all agree, I think, that transfer of information is a must. And until the big revolution in information technology, there was no choice. Teachers had to transfer information. Which information technology revolution am I talking about here? The book, right? Gutenberg, 1498. Until there were books, you had no choice as a teacher. You had to deliver information to the next generation. Right? So you put the sage on the stage, and the students were basically scribes taking down the information. You'd think, why 500 years ago we abandoned lecturing? Well, because books were not really a commodity. It was expensive, they were hand printed. So at least until the Industrial Revolution, there was a need for education to focus exclusively on delivery of information. Then came the Industrial Revolution about 150 years ago, and books slowly became a commodity. Then we clung that antiquated, medieval approach to teaching, focusing on the delivery of information, throwing in some practice too, but never really going beyond the real assimilation of information. Now information comes at us from everywhere. iPhones, iPad, Androids, you name it. Yet we're still focusing on the delivery of information. That second step, assimilation of information, where did that happen? I've often asked myself the question, where did the assimilation of information happen outside of the class. Right? So if you ask yourself, which is the easy part, I'd say we all agree, one, the transfer of information is the easy part. It's the second part that's hard. So it's kind of ironic that that second part is taking place outside of the class, where there's no interaction between the instructor and the teacher, and the student is essentially left on his or her own. We should really focus on this second part. So 20 years ago, or 22 years ago, I thought we should really invert the sequence. I'm very happy to see that, especially in K-12 circles, people are talking more and more about flipping this sequence. So in other words, put one out of class and two in class. Our only regret is that, again, everybody focuses on the easy part. There's a lot of talk about the classroom, and everybody's talking about learning. Delivery by video, Cellcom, Udacity, Coursera, you name it, edX. That's not the hard part. The hard part is the second. What do you do if you find, because let's face it, Cellcom and all the others, it's really open-minded to new possibles, right? It's simply doing the stuff that we did in class, now out of class on a video. There's nothing innovative at all about it. How can we help with number two? And that's what I'm going to focus on right now. We're going to try it out as my students did in an imaginary little physics class. Well, people. And you know, the solution presented itself completely serendipitously. Because after giving this FCI to my students, I found that my students were shocked by how truly they'd done. We're close to midterm examinations coming up that dealt with rotational dynamics and you name it. So they thought they had understood force, and I thought so too, that they had understood force completely. Yet the scores on this FCI, this force constability, was very poor. So they asked me for a special session to go through every single question. And I remember this one question where I made some drawings on the board, I explained it in about 2 minutes. 2 minutes to explain this question. I made a drawing. I thought I did the clearest possible explanation I could. I turned around, and I could see at once from their faces that they were confused. So I said, does anybody have a question? They were so confused they couldn't articulate a question. You know how it is, right? If you really struggle, something it's hard to raise your hand and ask a question. So I thought this is serious because it dealt with Newton's third law, actual reaction, which is a very basic law. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to have you raise my drawings, and now I'm going to bring you not only this third law, but also second law, and I'm going to communicate their experience. I took about 8 minutes. I gave the most brilliant explanation you could possibly imagine. At the end, I turned around triumphantly, doing that. I nailed it this time, only to see that they were even more confused. And they could still not articulate a question. I didn't know what to do. I did not know what to do. But I knew one thing, about half of them had given the right answer on the FCI. So in a moment of despair, I said, why don't you discuss it with your neighbor? You have to imagine about 150 students in an auditorium. Complete chaos broke out. They forgot in front of the classroom. And what's more, in just 2 minutes, they figured it out. I thought just 10 minutes, and unsuccessfully. Yet in just 2 minutes, they figured it out. Well, imagine if this was sitting next to each other. John. Never the right answer for the right reason. On average, never John than the other way around. But, and this is it. Mary John. Why? Because she has only recently learned it. She still knows what the conceptual is. It's so why something that's a little negative, but you get what I mean, right? It's what Steven Pinker called calls the curse of knowledge. It's sort of an ironic argument, right? Because you tend to think of the more of an expert you become in your field, the more qualified you are to teach. And I'm making the opposite argument here. But I think it makes a lot of sense. As a teacher, you become unaware of the most basic difficulties that you can learn. And this comes back to the question I asked at the beginning of this presentation when I asked you to reflect on your own indication of an important skill. You're unaware of how you learn it. And you know, probably as a teacher, you've had students come up to you and ask you a question and you think, what's wrong with this student? I mean, it's so clear. What is there not to understand about it? Or as a student, you may know that sometimes you would not even walk up to your professor and ask a question because you know you get an answer that would go straight over your head. Instead, you would ask another student, hey, did you understand what the professor sort of said in class? So I hope that resonates. So I thought, you know, how can I exploit this interaction between students in the class? Well, one is to throw, of course, the transfer of information out of the class. And luckily, nowadays, that is easy, and I won't spend any time on it. Most discussions on the flipped classroom all focus on that part one. I want to focus on that part two. So what do I do in class? In class, I teach by questioning rather than telling. So I come in, I talk a few minutes, put a question on the classroom. I give students time to think about the question. Then I poll them. Then we discuss, we use, in fact, the whole clicker industry started in my classroom. I'll show you the history in just a second. I have them talk to each other. I tell them, find a neighbor who has a different answer and try to convince that neighbor of your answer. When you've done so, or you've been convinced by him or her, find another neighbor and spread the word. If necessary, just get up and walk around. Then I poll them again, and then I explain. And of course, all the learning, and then I repeat that cycle until class time is up. The important part is this discussion. So let me briefly show you the discussion in my class, a little video clip. So we have a rectangular loop. So I read the question with my students in the direction indicated by the... Don't worry about the question, okay? So the question is, what are the magnetic forces on the 4 different sides of this loop? So take a minute to think about this, and then the answers. I do not want them to talk to each other, right? That has to be quiet. I can see the answer stream in. They do not see that distribution. So turn to your neighbor and see if you can convince one another of the correct choice. Initially, we had sort of an even split. And now we have an absolutely overwhelming majority for choice number 2. Incidentally, somebody just tweeted here a moment ago on the same latitude as my 7-year-old students. And it's true. In a sense, I'm turning my classroom into a kindergarten, right? I bring this interaction that, you know, 7-year-olds are sponges for knowledge. It's just fantastic. I mean, you don't have to do anything. They take ownership of their learning. They want to understand. Right? I mean, every human being is born as a scientist in a sense. Full of curiosity, full of desire to learn. And somehow, you know, it turns off. Huh? Okay. So, what is the important thing here? The important thing is the students are engaged. There's not two-way flow of information from me to the students, from the students to me. What's more, the students get to continuously assess their own knowledge. There's continuous formative assessment. And as somebody mentioned feedback early on, this brings the feedback there, back in the middle of the classroom. So let's show actually a slightly more detailed flow chart. So I talk, I ask a question, I poll them. If more than 70% gets it correct, or by the way, you don't have to take notes. I'm against taking notes. You can download these slides. I'll upload them immediately after my talk, and I'll give you the URL. if more than 70% is it right, it doesn't make much sense to have them talk to one another because most of them get it. So I explain it, repeat from the start. If between 30 and 70% get it right, then I ask them to talk to each other, I repoll them, explain and repeat. If less than 30% get it right, it doesn't make much sense to have them talk to each other because, you know, most of them already have it wrong and they're never going to get it. It's too hard. So on the right, the question is too easy. On the left, the question is too hard. The ideal questions are the middle ones, but even if occasionally you stray outside of that, it's not a big problem. You want to try it? Good. I had asked Alan to distribute this little two-pager about thermal expansion. Did you all read it? No? I'm just kidding you. But you know what that means? That means that I will have to lecture you about thermal expansion. Okay, good. I love lecturing, so you've probably noticed that by now. My only regret about peer instruction is that I don't get to lecture very much anymore in my classes. So, thermal expansion. Most solids, when they heat up, expand in volume, make them all solids. And it's particularly pronounced for metals. And you may have noticed that trains, the rails, are slightly apart. In fact, when you're in a train, you hear this click-clack sound of the wheels going from one segment of a rail to another one. You may have wondered, why don't they just jam these pieces together? Well, if they do, and the temperature goes up over long sections of rail, you can get all of that expansion that accumulates, and you know, the whole thing bends out of shape, and the train derails. This happens because metals, as any other material, are made up of atoms, and atoms get further apart when they heat up. So this is a cold metal, this is a hot metal. Cold, hot. This is the only thing you need to know to answer this question. Now you may wonder, why do they get further away from one another? Well, the reason is that atoms don't sit still, they vibrate, and the amplitude of that vibration is what we call temperature. So this is a cold atom, this is a hot atom. Right? Now imagine your cold atoms, you would just sit there, you'd actually be wiggling, right? If you get hotter, you wiggle more. Now imagine your neighbor starts wiggling more, you get away from it, right? Atoms are like that. It's not just those 9. It's all of them, and there are billions and billions and billions of them. Questions, anybody? No? I knew I was good at explaining things, right? But look, I am not going to hide the screen and then simply ask you, when metals get hotter, do atoms get A closer together, B stay distant, C further apart from each other? That will be just me delivering information to you, you delivering back. I'm going to take this to a different context. So you better make sure you really understand it. No questions? Wow. Okay, so keep this picture in mind. Cold atoms, hot atoms. Last chance. You're flattering me. Consider a rectangular metal plate with a circular hole in it. You can feel the question coming now, right? When the plate is uniformly heated, what happens to the diameter of that hole? Does it increase? Does it decrease? Or does it stay the same? Wow, people are answering right away. I mean, think before you answer, please. So answer this question. If you don't have a device, do not talk to your neighbor yet. Shh. Think for yourself. Commit on a little piece of paper. Okay, we have about 140 responses in already. That's a lot. Okay, another 30 seconds to make up your mind. And you know, if you don't know, if you feel uncertain, doesn't matter, but you have to make an answer. Even if you don't have a device, just write down 1, 2, 3, or 4, can't tell. I mean, on the handheld devices, there's a fourth choice. there is no way to tell. So you can choose that too. Okay, so please enter your answers. Now this is what I want you to do. I would like you to, oh, I see that this is not good. My choices, the choices on the handout system are labeled A, B, C, D, and then they're not in the same sequence as 1, 2, 3. But anyway, when you check with your neighbor, check on the word, not on the number or the letter in front of it. But what I want you to do is turn to the neighbors around you, find one with a different answer, try to convince one another. When you've done so, find somebody else. If everybody agrees, get up, walk around. Go ahead. Okay, look at this. Look at how engaged you all are. Alan, they can't stop talking. By the way, my apologies to the people in Austin. I just saw that some of you were desperately messaging me to stay behind my mic so you can better hear and see you. So I'll try to stay anchored, which is very difficult for me, but I'll do my best. I mean, you got all fire. Look, there's still some people there who are, who are gesticulating about these answers. You all got completely engaged. No, the answer doesn't even matter to this question. Because I've already made two important points. Oh, by the way, the question is live again. I would like you, before I continue, I would like you to re-answer, indicating what you currently believe to be the right answer. So if you've not changed your mind, you say exactly the same thing. You enter the same question, answer. And if you have changed your mind, and don't go by the 1, 2, 3 on the screen, go by what's on the system. Okay, so, thank you for answering. So, the first point I wanted to make is that, it's actually not that great news, is that most of you got this question wrong the first time around, in spite of my absolutely brilliant lecture, and I gave you everything you needed in order to answer that question. Right? So, you made a fantastic point. Lecturing does not work. These few minutes of talking about atoms were not enough to take that concept and put it in a different context. Pushed you too hard. Even though you all thought it was perfectly clear, there were no questions. Should have pushed a little bit harder. And notice that the engagement, right? I mean, I could have given you a lecture about thermal expansion and then said, if we take let me stop the delivery here. If we take a rectangular metal plate with a circular hole on it, and then we heat up this plate, then the diameter of this circular hole will, and then, I'm going to keep the suspense a little bit longer. You would not have been as engaged. You might have taken a note and written it down, but there would not have been this ownership, as Alan calls it. Now, before I tell you the answer, let's analyze what happened here. Right? What happened here? One is, you made a commitment. I made you make a commitment. After you made that commitment, you externalized your answer. You turned to your neighbors and you said, I chose B because blah, blah, blah. No, it should be 1, and you started arguing about what happened. And it was very interesting to listen to some of the discussions because they moved from answer or fact to reasoning. Right? You started to talk about a different level really here than just recall or anything else. And lastly, you became emotionally invested in the learning process. If I were to say, thank you very much, and walk away, you'd run after me, right? Okay, well, the correct answer, and I'm going to show you the polling statistics here, is number 1. Only 25%. Look at that! Do you see the emotional? Hello? Hello? Can I have your attention? Only 25% of you, only 25% of you had that right the first time. Remember that chart I showed you? If you're below 30, doesn't really the teaching doesn't work. There's just a few people who have the right answer. And do you notice the emotional engagement again? Right? I mean, I told you, I'm not here. Probably by now, you've forgotten that Alan invited me to talk about education, not to talk about thermal expansion. In your mind, you're focused on thermal expansion, but I really need to talk about education. Now, I don't want you to lie in bed tonight and think, why did this whole ignorant? Imagine you have a jar of marmalade. There's much of them in the back there, they're just waiting still. Imagine you have a jar of marmalade in the refrigerator. You take it out, you can't open it. Glass jar, metal lid, which consists of a ring and a plate. What do? You run the cover under hot water so that the ring with the hole in it expands. You say, well, that's not fair, because first of all, it's a ring, not a plate. Secondly, there's a metal top which pushes the ring out. Okay. Well, imagine that we do not have a plate with a hole in it. We have a plate with no hole in it. Well, this is paper, but let's imagine it's metal, right? You take out a pen, and and you draw a circle on it. Now you heat up this plate. What happens to the circle? Gets bigger. Everything gets bigger, so the circle gets bigger too. You say, well, that's unfair because there's no hole. If there was a hole, then the metal would expand into the hole. Okay. Imagine that we were to go outside, it's a beautiful day, and form a big circle holding hands. We are the atoms at the edge of the hole. Right? Can you imagine that? Now we're taking a step inwards towards the center of the circle. What happens to the distance between us? It gets smaller. Can't get smaller. Remember, the other person is shaking more, needs more space. So the only way to get the distance to be larger is to make the circle larger. The hole becomes larger. You won't forget this. And again, your mind is focused on some expansion, but we're here to talk about education. So back to peer instruction. I'm not showing you data here, but if you go to my Confessions doc, you can see the tripling of the learning gains by teaching this way. And also, this is a paper, it's not in my talk, but it's in one of our papers, much higher retention. Retention of knowledge and retention of students in STEM disciplines. And if you're interested in more information, we recently launched a social network of peer instruction users, peerinstruction.net, which also has a blog and information, tips on clickers, and so on. So I invite you to join the network at your convenience. Very easy to remember, peerinstruction.net. So now, in the last, what do I have here, 15 minutes or so, let's have some fun with what we recently started doing. Because I want to get back to that word feedback. Somebody mentioned it very early in my talk, and it's really smack on. Because one of the important parts of pre-instruction is the feedback. Right? I can see here on my screen, basically I control the software that you see there from my iPad. So in a real class, I walk around, and I'll project a few screens later so you can see what it looks like for the instructor. But I can see the question, I can see the distribution before, the distribution after, and so on. So initially, when I started developing instruction, there was no technology. So we used a show of hands together with Scantron cards because I wanted to collect data. Then a few years later, we got a big grant from the National Science Foundation to have a wired network of HP calculators. It cost a fortune, $300,000 or so for a classroom. It was great. I knew exactly where every student was seated. I could hover my mouse over the seat and see, oh, that's John sitting there. Connect names to faces. But it was a maintenance nightmare because students at the end of the class would forget that the device was actually plugged in. They would get up and walk away and pull the whole jack out of the seat, and it was expensive. And a few years later, the first clicker was developed by an alum of the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, where I teach, and manufactured in a factory in Hong Kong. It gave up lots of the benefits, like the seating allocation, and but it was very simple and very cheap. Fast forward 10 years, and now we have a zoo of clickers, as they're called, that have penetrated a lot of higher education, the corporate market, and K-12. But in the process, it all became about the technology. People would come up to me and say, oh, I have adopted your clickers. I said, it's not my clickers. And it would upset me terribly for two reasons. One is, in my mind, it was the pedagogy, not the technology that mattered. But more importantly, I missed the boat on commercializing them. And in the many years of giving workshops on peer instructions, I noticed that people had very different questions that had nothing to do with the technology. For example, how do you design good questions? How do you optimize the discussion in the classroom? How do you manage time with this approach? So that's when I decided a number of years ago to put together the knowledge of two of my colleagues with my own and form this software, this company, this software, Learning Catalytics. So one person is Gary King. Gary King is a social scientist who does and a statistician who does analysis of social media. He founded a company called Crimson Hexagon that analyzes the Twitter fire hose to predict trends. And when I heard that, I thought, wow, we should do data analytics on questions. This way we can design better questions. And more importantly, we can do away with multiple choice questions, which are very difficult to design, other than, you know, pretty inauthentic multiple choice questions. And then Brian Wilkoff was my postdoc who got his PhD in education at Stanford on a thesis to interpret sketches. So he basically trained a computer program to analyze functions like parabolas, let's say, and showed that you could train a computer to recognize drawn parabola at least as well as trained human beings can do. So the questions that we set out to answer are the three that I showed before, and we did that by basically using algorithms and data analytics to, one, improve the questionings, B, manage the discussion in the classroom, and C, facilitate time management in the classroom. So let's start with that first one. I already said multiple choice questions are hard to design. Why? Because as an expert, and this is true for authors, teachers, you name it, everybody who has learned the material, it's easy maybe to come up with a question and the right answer, but what are meaningful wrong answers? And if you don't have meaningful wrong answers, you're not going to probe any misconceptions. You're not going to actually elicit the wrong thinking and be able to address it. So we decided to have an extensible plugin architecture for many different question types. Far too many that I can show. I'm just going to highlight a few for you. Let's start with direction. This is a picture of Oahu, taken from the space shuttle, which is why it's not very sharp, because, you know, it's about 200 miles. It's about 200 miles high, and you know, here is Waikiki, and there's Diamond Head, and here's Pearl Harbor. This picture has a number of clues of the prevailing wind directions in Oahu. So you could talk about these clues in a class on earth sciences or whatever, and then ask the students to interpret those clues and draw an arrow that shows the prevailing wind directions. So on your screen, you should see this picture now. I want you to drag an arrow showing the direction, and then submit your answer. That might be below the picture. There's a button that says submit your response. And on my screen here, I will see the arrows that you draw. So go ahead, try to answer this question. So you have to draw an arrow and then hit submit below the picture. Now you can draw an arrow in whichever direction you want. This is not, I mean, I'm not forcing you to take one of the choices that I impose on you. You can take the clues, the clouds maybe, and so on, and draw an arrow. And I wish you could see it because the arrows actually cluster. I'll show you in just a second. On my iPad here, I can see a superposition of all of the arrows. I'm going to give you a few more seconds to enter your answer. Okay, good. You're doing a little bit better than on the question with the hole in the plate here. Okay, I'm going to show you the results on your screen. Stop the delivery, show the results. And you should see on your screen, share it with your neighbors, a picture that has an overlay of all of the arrows that have been drawn. And you could do this with vectors, with forces, with interpretation of any kind of visual image that involves things like orientation and so on. Let me show you another one. This is from my physics class. A ray of light hitting a mirror, which is connected to another mirror at right angles. So this is 90 degrees. The question is, light enters horizontally into the combination of two perpendicular mirrors as shown below. Indicate the direction of the incident light after it reflects off both mirrors. This is actually the instructor display. If I click this button, deliver, on the devices, students see this. They draw the arrow just like you did, and I can see all of the arrows that the students draw. And as you can see, a number of students thought it would go not straight back, which you can work out with simple geometry. I'm not going to do that here. But the clusters sort of at, 8 o'clock. I could not have predicted that. In my mind, I know the right answer, so I no longer know why somebody would think it goes to 8 o'clock. It would be really hard to make a multiple choice question. But here you just let these students answer. Then you tell them, talk to your neighbor. So here we have about 50-some% correct. They talk to each other, they teach each other, and after they teach each other, you can see we go to 73% correct. So they've actually taught one another. And they've addressed their specific misconceptions. Parallel. That student teaches that student teaches that, rather than me imposing my thinking on them. Mathematical expression, I am very sorry. I know it's, still early in the morning, but I'm going to make you work. Suppose that 2x minus y equals 4. What is x then? The question will be on the screen in just a second, but you need time to think about it. So take a little piece of paper, solve this algebraically, and enter your answer. Write it down as an equation, whichever way you want. I'm going to do it too. Oh, I need to think now. Oh, you know what? Did I do the right thing? Yes. We're doing better than how I pictured. Very good. I wanted to do some PM structure with this, but I'm not going to do it because we need to wrap up here pretty soon. But anyway, I'm going to show the result here. And notice that there are many different ways, if you look at your device, of answering the correct answer, but it actually has a mathematical parser. You have to look at your device to see the result here. There are many ways of writing down the correct answer, right? You could write down, in parentheses, 4 plus y divided by 2, or you could write 2 plus y over 2, or you could write y plus 4 in parentheses divided by 2, or you could write 0.5 plus 2. They're all correct. It actually interprets the mathematics and counts correct, whichever way you write it. Whichever way you write it. In fact, if you look at our display results, well, here we go. It will come on the screen. And you can see the green ones are right, the red ones are wrong. And you can see how many percent shows all of the different green representations at the top on my side. Oh yeah, 34% correct. It says how many are correct. So this is a great way of teaching mathematics that doesn't impose a specific notation or a specific way, because you can focus on the concepts rather than simply the representation. A region, here, with this one we'll do, this is the last one we'll actually do. I'm going to test your knowledge of geography here. Where's Tanzania? I know now because I went to climb Mount Kilimanjaro exactly a year ago. Fantastic experience, by the way. Where is Tanzania? Unfair question. So hit the country, you think it's Tanzania, and then hit submit answer. That's fine. Talk to your neighbor. No, it's not in the ocean. US. Here we go. Get the distribution for screen. I think just you can do this with discontinuous, arbitrary shaped region. By the way, this is Tanzania. You know, it was an eye-opening experience because on this time, which I did with my son, it was from many points of view a fantastic experience. I did it with my son, but one thing that it taught me about education was the following. We climbed up with a guide, and an assistant guide, and a number of porters. Most of them had not even finished elementary school. There was a 3G network all the way up to the crater rim. I was able to blog my way all the way up to the top. And not only was I on the internet as I hiked up the 100 kilometers back and forth, 50 kilometers up, 50 kilometers back, but the guides, the assistant guide and the porters were constantly on their phone, texting, looking up things, looking up the weather forecast, sending our GPS coordinates to the base camp so that everybody knew where we were. It was amazing. What I realized is how the internet actually becomes a lever of the playing field. Here were people who had not even finished elementary education, yet were able to get information on meteorology and so on. Anyway, here's another one. Tic-tac-toe. Select the right region. I'm going to do it, but you know, on the screen I'd see something like this. In the very elementary grades, calculus would be a nightmare because you have to map something to a number and then a number to a button. So you take early learners, you have to have many mappings, mental mappings that take place. With this, you can say, you know, which of the following is a circle? They see on the device and they click and you see it. Let's look at one more time, sketch. Right? Here is a function of the log of x. What is the derivative? Well, you show it on there. They draw the derivative. As an instructor, you see what your entire class draws. Right? Well, you could, of course, walk from table to table and see it, but you see that once. You can even superimpose and see these are right, these are wrong. These are the wrong type of models that take place. Here, the function, it's kind of small to read, x minus 3 squared plus 2, right? Well, students draw it, you can see the distribution of graph on. And I've done it with 100 students in my classes at Harvard. Or highlight a passage. Here is a piece of Shakespeare sonnet. They see it on their device, they have to read it, and then highlight the sentence that they think is most striking. As an instructor, you see a heat map showing which is the most selected part, and then you can start to see the discussion about the meaning of these different sentences. You can see the agglomerated idea from the whole class, but also see what individual responses are if you want. On the back end, we're putting all of this data analytics so that we learn from the learning, in a sense. I'm going to wrap up in just a few seconds here, because I want to talk about one more thing, which is, you know, this human interaction. We're actually putting in the results from an interesting, no, before I do that, we did this multiple choice question where you had a pre and a post distribution, right? I showed you one was the hole in the plate. One of the things we can do, I didn't do it here, is display the results not just as a histogram, but as a geographical map. I didn't let you select your seats. I could have done that before. I would have had to make a map of this auditorium. But this is my actual classroom at Harvard. This is before discussion, and if I look at the one after discussion, you can see that there's a marked improvement, but there's still some clustering of wrong answers. So I thought, you know, what we really need to do is, rather than having students turn to whoever they want to talk to, we should manage the pairing. Students so often talk to the people they shouldn't be talking to and don't talk to people they should. Chances are that you are sitting right now next to somebody you know. We're very social beings. And that person is probably thinking pretty similar to you. And you might benefit much more from talking to somebody you do not know. So now we ask the question, and the system determines the pairing. So on your device, it will say here at the bottom, please discuss your response with Brian Rukoff to your left. And here's what we found. If we let the student do the pairing, it says random pairing here, right? And we look at the number of students who change their answers, of those who are initially correct and those who are initially incorrect, we see that both camps change. You want this bar to be as high as possible, right? The ones who are incorrect, you want to change their mind. Those who are correct, you do not want to have them change their mind. Depending on the algorithm, we can increase that differential tremendously, simply by intelligently pairing the students, looking at their interaction, how they respond, and then doing it. In order to optimize this algorithm, we built a fabulous classroom. This is not part of learning analytics, but it's part of the research that goes into learning analytics. This classroom is equipped with high-definition cameras at the front that watch the students interact. And I worked together with a professor in computer science, getting this past the IR here. That was not easy, let me tell you. The students had no problem participating. By the way, it shows that in the age of Facebook and Twitter, you know, they're perfectly happy being videotaped and audio recorded. There are little hidden microphones between the seats that record every. I see some people were between the seats here. Don't worry. Whatever you said was totally private. There are no microphones here. So what we get is we get a computer that basically analyzes students, recognizes their faces. These are students who did not participate, did not opt into the study, or did not give permission to show their video. And so it recognizes the student, knows this student is sitting in that seat, and then it also follows the posture. So it basically at the end, we have the identity of the student, the location in the classroom as a function of time, the pose, the activity, including all of the metadata that come from this system. And we're looking for traits to optimize the interaction. What is it that determines optimum interaction and optimum learning? And building that into this algorithm that I didn't get to demonstrate here, but you can imagine what it does. And the other thing, which is that we also manage time, but I'm out of time, so I'm not going to talk about that last little feature, because I didn't manage my time myself very carefully here. I want to get back for a moment to a lecture. What happens in a lecture? In a lecture, going back to the old-fashioned approach, students never pay their utmost attention. You did not when you were listening to me explaining about the atoms. Yes, the information was there, but it didn't completely register. There was a recent study done at MIT which blew my mind. I alluded to it earlier. At MIT, in the Media Lab, they developed a little wearable sensor that you can wear around your wrist that measures neurological activity. No need to put electrodes in the brain, right? Because imagine wanting to follow a student during a certain while with electrodes in the brain. That'd be pretty complicated. Here's just a little thing around the thing. And they followed students for a period of a week. Here's one trace out of this article, which is here at the bottom. And don't write it down, you can download it from my website. So here's day one, in case you can't read it. Oops. Day one, day two, day three. And, back on the slide. And at the bottom is the hour. For some reason, it starts at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I guess that's when most students get up, I don't know. And then it ends at 3 o'clock. And as you can see, the activities are labeled. Look at those that are labeled lecture or class, actually. The trace goes flat. Compare that to sleep. Students are neurologically much more active when they sleep than when they're in class. Compare that to study, or lab, or homework, right? The only activity that matches class is TV watching, exactly. And if you start to think about it, it's not even that surprising, right? And people have done studies in the 70s about neurological activity during TV watching, and have shown that people, when they watch TV, go into some vegetative state. You know, the brain goes into all these alpha waves, and there's very little activity because you are a passive receiver of information. Why should we expect class to be different? It's not that different if you stop to think about it. So you don't pay utmost attention. You think you know it. You thought you knew it about the atoms getting further apart from one another. And you're not confronted with misconceptions. It's only when I ask a question that you were confronted with a misconception. So you walk out of class with this false sense of security. But it really is an illusion. A complete illusion. And I hope we can break that illusion. So in conclusion, education is not just about transferring information or getting students to do what we do. Discovery, exploration, it's a must. You need to be actively engaged. Take, in the words of Alan again, ownership of your learning. And our role as teacher is to create an environment that gives students ownership of their learning. Lastly, we use technology, but it's really not the technology. I mean, there's so much investments that are being made in technology, but it's not the technology, it's what you do with the technology. It's the pedagogy that matters. I hope that with learning capabilities, you've seen that you can implement a pedagogy. That's the real goal. We set out not to design the technology, no, to help people implement a pedagogy. You can use consumer devices. No need to buy smart boards, smart this, smart that. We need smart students, not smart boards, by the way, right? The smart board in itself is not going to get the information to the students any better than a blackboard or a whiteboard. Also, it avoids the pitfalls of multiple choice assessment, because you can do away with multiple choice. The whole template was still multiple choice. But the other questions that I showed you, let you decide on what you wanted to answer. And lastly, you can create a smart classroom anywhere. Right? You could, the only thing I need is my iPad and some kind of internet connection. We could go out in a parking lot, form a little circle, you could pull out your Android, iPhones, or whatever, and we could design a smart classroom anywhere, just using consumer devices. So I need to thank many people who contributed to this talk, and in particular also you for staying with me so long. If you want more information, there's the URL, azure.harvard.edu. You don't need to remember it. Just remember my last name, M-A-Z-U-R. Go to Google, hit the I'm feeling lucky button, and you'll get a copy of my presentation. Thank you very much.